You're strapped into a metal capsule, and the country that just launched you doesn't exist anymore. You'd call that impossible. It happened anyway, to one man. Sergei Krikalev, 33 years old, engineers calm eyes, blue Soviet flight suit. You're watching him launch in May 1991. 5 months, they told him, a routine tour on the Mir space station. He waved goodbye to the Soviet Union. He'd come back to something else entirely. Because down on the ground, that country was already coming apart. And nobody in mission control had a plan for what happens if the nation runs out before the mission does. So how do you bring a man home when home just disappeared off the map? Let's back up. Krikalev wasn't some rookie shot into the void for propaganda. He was one of the best flight engineers the Soviet space program had. Already flown once before, already trusted with the tricky repairs. This mission was supposed to be simple. Up, work, come home in October. But 3 months in, the whole ground crew started acting strange. Radio calls got shorter, updates got vaguer. Something was wrong down there. In August, tanks rolled into Moscow, a coup against Gorbachev himself. Krikalev watched his own country from 350 kilometers up and couldn't do a thing about it. The coup collapsed in 3 days, but it cracked something that never closed back up. One by one, the Soviet republics started walking out the door, and Krikalev's launch date for home kept sliding. Weeks, then months. Why keep delaying a man who's already been up there half a year? Because the answer, it turned out, came down to money. Plain and simple. Each Soyuz launch cost millions, and the treasury that paid for it was evaporating. So somebody made a call. Send up a paying customer instead of an empty seat. A cash-paying seat meant the ship going up couldn't be the one meant to bring Krikalev down, which meant his ride home just got pushed back again, indefinitely. Try explaining that to a man who's already spent half a year in a tin can. Meanwhile, on Earth, his passport was becoming a historical document. December 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. 15 new countries stood where one used to be, and somewhere above all of it, one man was still waiting for a ride. Here's the part nobody in mission control wanted to say out loud. Krikalev's launch site wasn't even in Russia anymore. Baikonur sat inside brand new Kazakhstan. His own hometown, Leningrad, had already renamed itself back to Saint Petersburg. The man hadn't moved an inch. The planet had rearranged itself underneath him. Reporters started calling him the last citizen of the USSR, which sounds almost funny until you remember he was still stuck up there. Now a second cosmonaut, Alexander Volkov, was floating up there right alongside him. 2 men, no country, and a space station that needed constant repair just to keep breathing. Their new paperwork came from an agency that hadn't existed when they launched. The Russian Space Agency, born mid-mission, now owned 2 men it hadn't sent up. And funding for their rescue flight was somewhere between maybe and we'll see. Krikalev radioed down and asked plainly when he was actually coming home. Nobody could give him a straight answer, not for months. His body was already paying the price for the wait. Zero gravity eats away at bone density, month after month, no exceptions. Doctors on the ground started quietly worrying he'd forget how to simply stand. Every extra week in orbit made the landing back on Earth riskier. And still, the ground kept saying, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." Here's the strange irony nobody planned for. The paying tourist flight actually saved him. That commercial seat finally freed up a ship that could bring him down. But even then, the return date kept slipping like sand through fingers. By March, he'd already blown past 10 months in orbit. Nobody had trained for that. Meanwhile, down on Earth, his home country's flag had changed twice. Imagine explaining that to your own kids over a scratchy radio link. He later admitted the hardest part wasn't the isolation, it was the not knowing. not knowing what Russia even looked like anymore, down there, waiting for him. Meanwhile, Alexander Volkov's own replacement crew was finally cleared for launch, which meant, finally, a real date. Written down, not crossed out. 311 days. That was the number stacking up above the Earth. And in a few days, that number was finally about to stop climbing. Or was it? Or was it? Because the capsule waiting for him only had 2 seats. 3 men needed a ride down. That math didn't work. So somebody, again, had to stay behind and wait longer. Krikalev volunteered. Of course he did. He was already the record holder for waiting. One more delay. 1 more month tacked onto a mission nobody had planned for. Down on Earth, Russian officials finally locked in the real rescue flight. This time, no tourists, no delays, just a ship built to bring him home. March 25, 1992, the date that finally held. 311 days. That was the final count when the hatch finally sealed. Then the capsule broke away from Mir and Earth rushed up to meet him. Re-entry alone can kill you if the angle's wrong by even a degree. And his body, after 10 months of zero gravity, wasn't built for the landing anymore. The parachute snapped open. The capsule slammed down onto the step. He'd left one country. He was about to land in 3 different ones, depending who you asked. Kazakhstan owned the land under him. Russia owned the mission. Ukraine, his birthplace, claimed him too. Ground crews pried the hatch open and pulled him out into freezing spring air. He couldn't stand on his own. 10 months in orbit does that to a body. He'd left as a citizen of the Soviet Union. He came back a citizen of Russia. Same man, same launch. A completely different nation waiting at the bottom. 311 days, longer than anyone had ever spent off the planet at that point. And here's the detail that still makes historians laugh, quietly. His paperwork listed his hometown as Leningrad, a city that by then didn't exist anymore either. He'd spent nearly a year proving that bureaucracy moves slower than orbital mechanics. Doctors kept him under close watch for weeks. His bones needed to remember gravity. He relearned how to walk, then how to simply stand still without swaying. Slowly, the man who missed the end of a superpower learned to live in what replaced it. He gave interviews. Reporters kept asking the same question over and over. What was it like, watching your country disappear from 350 kilometers up? He always answered the same calm way. Up there, the work never stopped mattering. But down here, everything he'd known had quietly rewritten itself without asking him. But here's the twist almost nobody remembers about what happened next. Years later, NASA came calling. They wanted the most patient man in spaceflight history. He'd become the first Russian to fly on an American space shuttle. The man who once got stranded by the fall of the Soviet Union now helped build its replacement's biggest project. He became the very first person to help construct the International Space Station. The same steady hands that waited 311 days now helped build something that would outlast every flag involved. Funny thing about history, it rarely apologizes for the timing. He went on to log more total time in space than any human before him. 803 days total across his whole career. All of it started with that one stranded mission, and that record stood for years until other cosmonauts finally caught up. But nobody has ever matched the specific, strange thing that happened to him in '91. He didn't just travel through space, he traveled through the end of an empire. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel loves stories like this one. So hit subscribe. A new animated history documentary drops every Saturday. Because history doesn't pause for paperwork. It just keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. 311 days. Still one of the strangest numbers in spaceflight history. Not because of distance, not because of danger, because of what changed underneath him. A whole superpower rose and fell faster than one man's single trip to orbit. Try explaining that one at a bar. Nobody believes it the first time. Krikalev himself never made a big deal of it. Engineers rarely do. He just did the math, did the job, and let the politics sort itself out below him, which, in its own quiet way, might be the most Soviet engineer thing imaginable. Somewhere out there, his old Soyuz capsule still sits in a museum, scorched and silent. A time capsule from a country that doesn't exist, carrying a man who very much still does. And somewhere in an archive, his old red passport still sits sealed in a folder, stamped by a government that vanished before he even got the chance to use it again. So next time you complain about a delayed flight, remember this man. He waited 311 days and landed in a country that hadn't been born when he left. Some stories sound too strange to be true. This one just happens to be real. Next week, we're heading to a war fought entirely by accident. You won't want to miss that one.